Lee had never truly liked her mother-in-law, Élise. Élise, an authoritarian and traditional woman, had always held a very precise vision of what a good wife and mother should be. Their disagreements were frequent, and Lee had always hoped that time would ease the tension. When her husband Thomas suggested Élise come live with them, Lee firmly objected. "We need our privacy," she argued. "Besides, she will never fit in." Thomas, caught between two fires, finally gave up the idea, but the seed of discord had been sown. Cruel fate was about to shatter their balance. One evening, on his way home from work, Thomas was the victim of a car accident. The doctors did all they could, but he did not survive. Lee found herself widowed at 32 with two young children to care for. In the days that followed the tragedy, Élise appeared on their doorstep, her face etched with sorrow. "You need me, Lee," she declared softly. "Let me help you." Lee felt lost, overwhelmed by grief and uncertainty. She needed support, but the idea of living under the same roof as Élise filled her with dread. Yet she had no choice. Without her mother-in-law's help, she didn't know how she would manage. The first few weeks were difficult. Old resentments resurfaced, and tensions were palpable. Élise, though trying to be helpful, struggled to step back. She made decisions for Lee, criticized her children's upbringing, and constantly reminded her of what she should have done differently. Lee felt suffocated. She felt like she was reliving the same conflicts as before, but this time she was alone and vulnerable. She blamed herself for not being strong enough to stand up to her mother-in-law. But she was exhausted by grief and the stress of daily life. As the months passed, things began to change. Lee realized that, despite her flaws, Élise loved her deeply and simply wanted to protect her. She also understood that her mother-in-law was suffering from the loss of her son herself. Little by little, Lee and Élise learned to know and appreciate each other. They shared memories of Thomas, wept together, and supported each other. The house, which had been a place of tension, became a haven of peace. Lee discovered a strength within herself that she didn't know existed. She learned to manage her grief, raise her children, and rebuild her life. She realized that even though she hadn't chosen this new reality, she could make something positive out of it. And so, the two women, once opposed, found themselves bound by grief and love. Their story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity of love to heal the deepest wounds. As time went on, the relationship between Lee and Élise solidified. They had learned to respect each other, finding balance in their shared life. The children, for their part, had grown attached to their grandmother and appreciated her presence. One evening, as they sat on the sofa with a photo album in hand, Élise turned to the letters. "You know, Lee, I'm sorry for everything I may have done to you. I was afraid of losing you, of no longer being important to you." Lee hugged her. "I know, Mum. But now things have changed. We are a family." Élise smiled, touched. "Yes, a family." Parallel to this reconciliation, Lee began to feel ready to turn a new page. She enrolled in management courses, an area that had interested her for a long time. She wanted to give meaning to her grief, to this ordeal that had marked her so much. At work, she met Marc, a gentle and caring man. They became friends and then fell in love. Marc was patient and understanding. He accepted Lee as she was, with her children and her scars. When Lee announced to Lisa that she was planning to remarry, she was surprised by her mother-in-law's reaction. "I'm happy for you, Loletta's. You have the right to be happy." On the wedding day, Élise was beaming. She had found her smile again and looked younger. She had become a loving grandmother and a precious friend. Years passed, and Lee watched her children grow up, surrounded by the love of their blended family. She had gone through many trials, but she had emerged stronger from all these experiences. She had learned to face loss, to forgive, and to love, and she knew that no matter what the future held, she would always be surrounded by the people who mattered most to her. Years had passed, and Lee and Marc had built a stable and happy life together. The children were teenagers and seemed to have accepted their stepfather. However, tensions resurfaced from time to time, especially when important family events occurred, such as Thomas's birthdays or holiday seasons. During a family dinner, as Marc proposed a toast to the future, the youngest child, Benjamin, suddenly stood up and left the table. Lee, worried, followed him to his room. He was in tears. "Why do you want to replace Dad? No one can ever replace him," he exclaimed. That evening, Lee and Marc talked at length. They realized that, despite the progress made, the children still needed time to grieve and accept this new reality. Adolescence is a time of great upheaval, and the presence of a stepfather can exacerbate the difficulties young people face. Teenagers seek to assert their identity, test their limits, and rebel against authority. In this context, the figure of the stepfather can become a symbol of everything they reject. Arguments became more frequent, doors slammed, and hurtful words flew. Marc, although he loved the children deeply, sometimes felt powerless in the face of their attitude. Lee, for her part, felt torn between the desire to protect her children and the desire to support her partner. To address this situation, Lee and Marc decided to consult a family therapist. The therapist helped them understand each other's needs and implement strategies to improve communication within the family. They also encouraged the children to express their feelings without judgment. They explained to them that the love for their father did not prevent them from loving Marc, and that both feelings could coexist. Little by little, the tensions subsided. The children understood that Marc was not trying to replace their father, but simply wanted to be there for them. They began to consider him a full member of the family. A few years later, Benjamin, the most reluctant at first, eventually integrated Marc into his life. He even called him Papa Marc and spent more and more time with him. The other children had followed the same path. The family was close-knit, and Lee and Marc could finally enjoy their happiness fully. They had gone through many trials, but their love and perseverance had finally paid off. Years had passed, and Lee's family was now united and close. The children had grown up, and their relationship with Mark was excellent. Yet certain memories persisted, and Thomas's ghost continued to haunt their lives. It was during a visit from Élise, the paternal grandmother, that these wounds reopened. Arriving with a big smile and arms loaded with gifts, she intended to spend a few weeks with them. At first, everything went well. Élise was attentive to her grandchildren, telling them anecdotes about their father. But little by little, she began to insist on the resemblance between the children and Thomas, evoking specific memories, expressions, gestures. The children, who had tried to forget, felt torn again between their biological father and their stepfather. The comparisons were painful, and they brought up questions they thought they had settled. Lee, who had worked so hard to rebuild her family, felt powerless. She didn't want to hurt her mother-in-law, but she didn't want to see her children suffer either. She spoke to Marc, who suggested they talk openly with Élise. During a frank and sincere conversation, Lee explained to her mother-in-law that while she loved hearing about Thomas, it was causing her children pain. Élise, surprised, apologized. She had acted out of love, but she had forgotten that the past could be painful for the children. Together, they decided to put in place a few rules to preserve peace within the family. Élise would commit to talking less about the past and focusing on the present. The children, for their part, would be encouraged to express their emotions and ask all their questions. Élise's departure was an upheaval for the whole family. The goodbyes were emotional, and Lee felt torn between the relief of seeing some calm return and the sadness of seeing her son leave. Benjamin, for his part, seemed more determined than ever. He had always been very attached to his grandmother, and the idea of living in the countryside, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, excited him. Lee and Marc tried to dissuade him, but nothing worked. "I need a change," he had told them. "I want to discover something else, live a different life." The first few weeks in the village were difficult for Benjamin. He missed his friends, his school, and even Marc, whom he had come to consider a paternal figure. But little by little, he acclimatized to his new environment. He discovered nature, helped his grandmother in the garden, and made new friends. Élise was delighted to see him happy. She had always dreamed of sharing her daily life with one of her grandchildren. Together, they spent long hours discussing, reading, and walking in the woods. Benjamin's departure had left a large void in the family. Lee and Marc felt incomplete. They tried to maintain contact with their son, but distance separated them. The other children also felt their brother's absence. Lee blamed herself for not knowing how to keep Benjamin. She was afraid of having pushed him to make a choice he might regret later. Marc, for his part, tried to comfort her and remind her that they had to respect everyone's decisions. Benjamin's future remained uncertain. Was this a definitive choice, or just a temporary break? No one could say. Lee and Marc hoped he would return one day, but they knew they had to give him time to find his way. In his new haven of peace, Benjamin began to take a closer interest in his family history. He spent hours rummaging through old photo albums, listening to his grandmother's stories about his father. Élise, delighted to see her grandson interested in his roots, showed him the places where Thomas had loved to play as a child. One day, while walking in the woods, Élise pointed out an old oak tree. "It was under this tree that your father built his first cabin," she told him, her eyes shining with memories. Benjamin was touched by this revelation. He sat in the shade of the tree and closed his eyes, trying to imagine his father as a child, mischievous and full of life. Intrigued, Benjamin decided to explore the surroundings. He discovered a small stream where Thomas liked to fish with his grandfather, an old abandoned mill where he used to hide with his friends. Each discovery was like a piece of a puzzle, allowing him to get to know his father better. Over the weeks, Benjamin began to see his father in a new light. He was no longer just the man he had lost, but also a boy full of energy and dreams. He realized that sharing this common passion with his grandmother brought him closer to his father in an unexpected way. One evening, while watching the stars, Benjamin confided in Élise. "I think I understand Dad better now," he said. "He was like me. He needed freedom to escape." Élise hugged him. "Your father was an extraordinary boy, Benjamin, and you are too." This stay in the countryside had profoundly transformed Benjamin. He returned from this internal journey with a better understanding of himself and his family. He had found a balance between the past and the present, between the memory of his father and his new life. When he returned to his parents, he was different. He was more composed, more mature. He had learned to appreciate the little things in life and to fully live in the present moment.